My father smashed a heavy landscaping brick directly into my face in the middle of our family patio. He did it after my wealthy fiancé refused to leave me for my younger sister. As I lay bleeding onto the imported stone, my mother simply stepped over my body, laughed coldly, and said, "Let us see if he still loves you with that face." They thought they had finally broken me. They had absolutely no idea they had just started a brutal war that would cost them their entire empire. Before I share how I destroyed their perfect facade, let me know where you are watching from below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to survive the toxic people who were supposed to protect you. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth before I realized I was falling. 1 second I stood on the freshly laid patio of my parents' Atlanta mega mansion, and the next a paving brick slammed into my forehead with a sickening crack. The world spun into a dizzying blur of green grass and red droplets. My father, Pastor Marcus, the spiritual leader of a 10,000-member congregation, stood over me. His chest heaved as he gripped the brick in his right hand. The same hand that baptized innocent children every Sunday was now dripping with my blood. Julian threw himself over my body, shielding me. He is a corporate lawyer from a prominent old money family, usually calm and entirely composed, but right now he looked ready to commit murder. He shoved my father back so hard, the pastor stumbled into a heavy marble planter. "Get away from her!" Julian roared, his deep voice echoing off the high brick walls of the estate. "If you touch her again, I swear to God, I will end you." He pulled off his custom suit jacket, pressing the expensive fabric tightly against my head to stop the bleeding. The crisp white shirt he wore beneath it was already turning a horrific shade of crimson. A few feet away, my younger sister Chloe was pacing like a caged animal, throwing a massive, unhinged tantrum. She was wearing a tight dress that left nothing to the imagination, the exact dress she had worn just 10 minutes earlier when she cornered Julian alone in the kitchen. She had poured him a glass of expensive scotch, pressed her body against him, and boldly suggested he leave his freelance property manager fiancé for a woman with actual class. She literally told him she was the true prize of our family. Julian had not just rejected her. He had utterly humiliated her. He told her he would never trade a queen for a useless parasite who lived off her parents' credit cards. My father simply could not handle his golden child crying. In his eyes, Chloe could do no wrong whatsoever. If she wanted something, she got it immediately. If she failed, it was always my fault for not paving the way for her. "Look what you did to your sister," my father yelled, pointing the bloody brick at me while Julian kept him at a safe distance. "You embarrassed her in front of our guests. You brought this arrogant white man into my house to disrespect my family. You always ruin everything, Maya. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter failure trying to drag Chloe down to your miserable level." The large glass door slid open and my mother Vivian stepped out onto the patio. She held a crystal champagne flute, her hair styled perfectly for the elite evening event they were hosting later. She did not scream when she saw the thick blood pooling around my head. She did not rush over to check if her oldest daughter was even alive. Instead, she took a slow sip of her drink, carefully stepped right over my legs to avoid getting blood on her designer heels, and looked down at me with absolute disgust. She let out a cold, sharp laugh. "Well, let us see if your rich lawyer still loves you with a scarred-up face," she sneered. "You should have known your place, Maya. You should have just let Chloe have him. It would have saved you a painful trip to the emergency room." The distant wail of police sirens pierced the thick evening air. Julian had dialed 911 the second I hit the ground, his phone still resting on the patio stones with the emergency dispatcher on speaker. But my parents did not look panicked at all. They looked incredibly calm. My father tossed the bloody brick into the bushes and wiped his hands clean on a towel. He smoothed down his polo shirt and nodded at my mother. When the police burst through the wrought iron gates, I recognized the officers immediately. They were both senior members of my father's megachurch. They attended his Sunday services every single week. They worshipped the ground he walked on. My mother instantly transformed. The cold, calculating woman vanished, replaced by a terrified, hysterical mother. She threw her arms around Chloe, who suddenly grabbed her own arm and started wailing loudly, as if she had been attacked. "Arrest her!" my mother screamed, pointing a trembling finger straight at me, while fake tears streamed down her perfectly powdered face. She went crazy. She grabbed a weapon and tried to kill my youngest daughter. Pastor Marcus had to step in to save Chloe from being murdered. "Please, officers, she is completely out of control." These two officers did not even look at the massive gash on my head or the blood soaking Julian's shirt. They drew their weapons and marched straight toward me, completely ignoring Julian's furious shouts that they had the wrong person. They thought they had trapped me. They thought their holy facade would protect them like it always did. They did not know I had spent the last week setting up a brilliant trap of my own. The heavy thud of combat boots against the patio stones drowned out the fading wail of the sirens. Two uniformed officers rushed through the wrought iron gates of the estate, their hands already resting on their duty belts. They did not pause to assess the scene. They did not stop to ask why a woman was bleeding heavily from her forehead while her family stood perfectly uninjured nearby. Officer Jenkins and Officer Davis moved with aggressive purpose, making a direct line for me. Julian stepped forward, throwing his hands up in a universally recognized gesture to stop. But Davis shoved him aside with a brutal thrust of his shoulder. Before I could even wipe the blood from my eyes, Jenkins grabbed my arms, twisted them roughly behind my back, and slammed cold steel handcuffs around my wrists. The metal bit sharply into my skin, securing me before a single question was asked. Across the patio, Chloe practically threw herself into the arms of the second officer. She let out a dramatic, breathless sob, holding up her left forearm like it had been severed. A thin, shallow red scratch was barely visible on her skin, something she had clearly done with her own fingernail just seconds before the police arrived. She wailed about how terrified she was, claiming I had flown into a jealous rage and attacked her out of nowhere. My mother wrapped a protective arm around Chloe, nodding solemnly at the officers while shooting me a look of pure, venomous triumph. My father, the beloved Pastor Marcus, adopted his signature look of pastoral sorrow, shaking his head at the officers, as if to apologize for his wayward daughter. Officer Jenkins tightened the cuffs until my fingers began to tingle. He shoved me roughly toward the patio edge, sneering as he read me my rights. He did not read them like a professional. He read them like a disappointed scolding, injecting his own commentary between the legal lines. "You just could not help yourself, could you, Maya?" Jenkins muttered, his breath hot near my ear. "You are always the troublemaker, always the one bringing drama to this house. Your parents are absolute pillars of the Atlanta community. They feed the homeless, they run the largest congregation in the state, and they have given you every opportunity in the world. And what do? You act like a common thug. You are nothing but a struggling freelance property manager, and you are out here ruining their pristine image because you cannot handle your sister being successful." The sheer audacity of the police officer lecturing me with my own family's toxic narrative made my blood boil. It was no secret that the local precinct was packed with members of my father's megachurch. Jenkins and Davis practically worshipped my father, treating him less like a citizen and more like a deity who controlled their spiritual salvation. To them, Pastor Marcus was completely untouchable. If he said I was the aggressor, I was the aggressor, even with a gaping wound on my forehead and his hands wiped clean of my blood. Julian was not going to let this happen. He stepped right back into the center of the conflict, his voice dropping an octave into the cold, lethal tone he used in federal courtrooms. He towered over Officer Davis, his blue eyes blazing with a calculated fury. "Uncuff her right now," Julian demanded, his voice slicing through Chloe's fake sobbing. "I am Julian Vance, senior partner at Vance and Sterling Corporate Law. You are arresting the victim of a violent aggravated assault without conducting a basic scene investigation. You have ignored a severe head injury. You have completely bypassed standard protocol because you attend a church run by the man who just tried to cave her skull in with a brick. If those cuffs are not off her wrists in exactly 3 seconds, I will personally see to it that both of your badges are sitting on the police chief's desk by tomorrow morning, and I will sue this precinct into bankruptcy before lunch." For a fraction of a second, Officer Davis looked uncertain. The Vance family name carried massive weight in legal circles, representing generations of old money power and relentless litigation. But the megachurch influence in this specific neighborhood ran too deep. Jenkins scoffed, puffing out his chest to challenge Julian. "You can spout all the legal threats you want," Mr. Vance Jenkins sneered. "But we have 3 credible witnesses who say she initiated a violent assault, and 1 victim with visible injuries. Your fiancé is going to a holding cell tonight, and if you interfere with my duty one more time, you are going to the cell right next to hers for obstructing an officer." Julian clenched his fist so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He looked ready to physically fight the officers, ready to risk his own freedom to get me out of those cuffs. He took a step forward, his jaw set, but I caught his eye. I needed him outside of a jail cell. I needed him to execute the next phase of the plan. "Julian," I said, my voice shockingly steady despite the blood dripping off my chin and staining the front of my blouse. "Stop. Do not fight them. Let them take me." He froze, looking at me, as if I had lost my mind. My parents looked equally surprised. They had expected me to scream, to cry, to beg for mercy, or to throw a wild tantrum that would perfectly validate their lies. They wanted me to look unhinged. Instead, I stood tall, my shoulders pulled back, projecting an aura of terrifying calmness that made Officer Jenkins instinctively loosen his grip on my arms. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the pain in my head sharpen my focus. As Jenkins shoved me forward toward the side gate, I stumbled, intentionally bumping hard against Julian's chest. In that split second of chaotic movement while the officers were distracted trying to right me, I slipped my bloody cell phone from my back pocket directly into Julian's open hand. He gripped it instantly, hiding it against his side. I looked up at him, offering a chilling smile through the blood that was currently ruining my face. "Folder 4. I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise of the rustling trees and police radios. "The hidden patio cameras I installed for their security upgrade last week. Do not show the cops. Send it to your mother." The harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct cast a sickly yellow glow over the crowded bullpen. I sat handcuffed to a heavy metal bench, a cheap paper towel pressed firmly against my forehead, watching a masterclass in manipulation unfold across the room. Officer Jenkins and Officer Davis hovered around my father and sister like personal servants catering to royalty. Chloe sat at a designated victim desk, her face buried in her manicured hands, her shoulders shaking with beautifully manufactured sobs. She pointed a trembling finger at the microscopic scratch on her left forearm, weaving a tale of unprovoked terror. She claimed I had lunged at her in a fit of wild jealousy, screaming that if I could not have the family fortune, no one would. My father stood right behind her, his hand resting piously on her shoulder, playing the role of the heartbroken shepherd forced to turn in his own flock. He told the officers he had only picked up the heavy brick in self-defense, hoping to disarm his violently unhinged eldest daughter. He spoke of my supposed history of mental instability, a complete fabrication. They nodded along too with sympathetic murmurs. The desk sergeant even offered my father a hot cup of coffee, apologizing profusely for the trauma his esteemed family had to endure tonight. They were eagerly writing up the aggravated assault charges against me, preparing to lock me in a holding cell for the night. I watched their mouths move, calculating my next move, while ignoring the throbbing pain in my skull. Officer Jenkins walked over to me, tightening the metal cuffs until my fingers began to tingle with numbness. He sneered down at me as he began reciting my rights, injecting his own biased commentary between the legal lines. "You just could not help yourself tonight, could you?" Maya Jenkins muttered, his breath stale and hostile. "You are always the troublemaker, always the one bringing drama to a peaceful house. Your parents are absolute pillars of the Atlanta Black community. They feed the homeless, they run the largest congregation in the entire state, and they have given you every opportunity in the world. And what do? You act like a common thug. You are nothing but a struggling freelance property manager, and you are out here ruining their pristine image because you cannot handle your younger sister being successful." Julian stepped right back into the center of the conflict, his voice dropping an octave into the cold, lethal tone he exclusively used in high-stakes federal courtrooms. He towered over Officer Jenkins, his blue eyes blazing with a calculated fury that demanded immediate submission. "Uncuff her right now," Julian demanded, his voice slicing through Chloe's fake sobbing. "I am Julian Vance, senior partner at Vance and Sterling Corporate Law. You are arresting the victim of a violent, aggravated assault without conducting a basic scene investigation. You have completely ignored a severe head injury. You have bypassed standard protocol because you attend a church run by the man who just tried to cave her skull in with a brick. If those cuffs are not off her wrists in exactly 3 seconds, I will personally see to it that both of your badges are sitting on the police chief's desk by tomorrow morning, and I will sue this precinct into bankruptcy before lunch." For a fraction of a second, Jenkins looked uncertain. The Vance family name carried massive weight in Atlanta legal circles, representing generations of old money power and relentless litigation. But the megachurch influence in this specific neighborhood ran too deep. Jenkins scoffed, puffing out his chest to challenge Julian. "You can spout all the legal threats you want," Mr. Vance Jenkins sneered. "But we have 3 credible witnesses who say she initiated a violent assault and 1 victim with visible injuries." The desk sergeant stood up, pointing a warning finger at Julian. "Step back, counselor, or you will be joining her in a cell for obstructing an investigation." Before Julian could unleash his next verbal assault, the heavy double doors of the precinct did not just open. They practically exploded inward, hitting the wall with a thunderous crash that silenced the entire room. Every officer, including the desk sergeant, froze in place. Walking through the doors was a woman who commanded absolute authority before she even spoke a single word. Judge Eleanor Vance wore a tailored charcoal suit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe twist. She was Julian's mother, a federal judge, notorious for a complete lack of mercy and a legal mind sharp enough to dissect any argument. The air in the precinct seemed to drop 10 degrees the second she stepped onto the faded linoleum floor. Officer Jenkins, recognizing her, instantly dropped his pen. He tried to straighten his posture, suddenly aware that his local church connections meant absolutely nothing against a sitting federal judge who dined with state senators. Judge Vance did not look at my father. She did not look at Chloe. She marched directly to the desk sergeant, her heels clicking like a metronome, counting down their careers. "I demand the immediate release of my future daughter-in-law," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying a lethal edge that echoed off the concrete walls. "You are currently detaining the victim of a brutal domestic assault." The desk sergeant stammered, his eyes darting toward my father for guidance. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we have multiple credible witness statements confirming Maya initiated the attack. We are processing her for aggravated assault as we speak." Judge Vance let out a laugh entirely devoid of humor. "Credible witnesses?" She repeated, her gaze shifting to Officer Jenkins. "You mean the 2 officers who bypassed a severely bleeding woman to arrest her based solely on the word of their own pastor? You call that police work? I call it a civil rights violation wrapped in a blatant conflict of interest." She turned slightly. "Julian, show them." Julian placed my bloody phone flat on the intake counter and tapped the screen. The unedited 4K resolution footage from the hidden patio camera played brilliantly under the harsh precinct lights. There was no audio, but none was needed. The crystal-clear video showed exactly what happened. It showed Chloe backing Julian into a corner. It showed Julian pushing her away. It showed my father grabbing the decorative brick from the landscaping border. It captured the exact horrifying moment he swung it with full force directly into my face. The video then clearly displayed my mother stepping over my bleeding body with a drink in her hand while Chloe casually scratched her own arm with her fingernail. The desk sergeant turned a sickly shade of gray. Officer Jenkins stared at the screen, a heavy bead of sweat tracing down his temple. My father's pious facade shattered instantly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Chloe stopped crying immediately, her hands dropping from her face as she realized her theatrical performance had just been completely dismantled. The door to the back offices swung open, and the police chief rushed out, having clearly been alerted to the federal judge standing in his lobby. He took one look at the video playing on the screen, then looked at my blood-soaked clothes and the metal cuffs biting into my wrists. "Unlock her right now," the chief barked at Officer Jenkins, absolute panic lacing his voice. Jenkins scrambled to comply, his hands shaking violently as he fumbled with the small keys. The heavy metal cuffs fell away with a clatter. I rubbed my raw wrists, keeping the paper towel pressed to my forehead. The chief turned his furious gaze toward my father. "Pastor Marcus, turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon." My father took a terrified step backward, raising his hands in a defensive panic. He looked at me, his eyes silently begging for the mercy he had completely denied me an hour ago. I stood up slowly, feeling a sharp throb behind my eyes, but I kept my posture perfectly straight. "Stop," I commanded. The entire room went dead silent again. The chief paused, handcuffs halfway out of his pouch. I looked directly at my father, seeing the absolute terror in his eyes, knowing his precious reputation was seconds away from being dragged through the mud. "I am not pressing charges today," I said, my voice steady and freezing cold. "Release him." Julian grabbed my arm, his blue eyes wide with furious disbelief. "Maya, what are you doing? He just tried to kill you. We have him on tape." Judge Vance looked at me, a calculating glint in her sharp eyes, waiting to see my play. The chief looked relieved but highly confused. "Are you absolutely certain, miss? If you walk out that door, he goes free tonight." I nodded once. "I am certain. We are leaving." I turned my back on my stunned family, refusing to give them a single ounce of closure or reassurance. I walked out of the double doors into the cool night air, Julian and his mother flanking me like a personal guard. The silence between us lasted until we reached the parking lot. Julian spun me around gently, his face twisted with raw, unrestrained anger. "Why did you let them go?" he demanded, gesturing wildly back toward the brick building. "They belong in a cell. We had them dead to rights, Maya. Why would you give them a pass?" I pulled the bloody paper towel away from my forehead, feeling the cold air sting the jagged wound. I looked at the man I loved, offering him a smile that held zero warmth. "Arresting a pastor is a scandal, Julian," I replied coldly. "I do not want a scandal. I want absolute annihilation, and they are about to hand me the keys." 2 weeks later, the air inside the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton felt thick with expensive perfume and unearned arrogance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the city's elite as they gathered to celebrate the engagement of my sister Chloe and her brand new fiancé Brad. Brad was a slick-talking finance bro with a custom-tailored suit, slicked-back blonde hair, and a laugh that was just a little too loud. To my parents, he was not just a future son-in-law. He was a status symbol. He was their golden ticket into the highest echelons of corporate wealth and the perfect accessory to elevate Pastor Marcus and his holy empire. I walked through the towering double doors with Julian by my side. I wore a striking emerald green gown that swept across the marble floor. I had not bothered to use concealer or style my hair to hide my forehead. The jagged pink scar from where my father smashed the landscaping brick into my skull was fully visible. It was a badge of honor, a permanent reminder of exactly who these people were beneath their designer clothes and righteous smiles. Julian kept his hand resting firmly on the small of my back, a silent and imposing warning to anyone who dared to step too close. It did not take long for the hounds to circle. My mother Vivian spotted me from across the room near the towering champagne fountain. Her perfectly practiced smile vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She marched toward us, her heels clicking sharply against the polished stone floor. She grabbed my arm, trying to pull me out of sight of her wealthy guests. But Julian stepped forward and shot her a look so lethal she immediately dropped her hand. "You actually have the nerve to show your face here tonight, Vivian," hissed her voice, dropping to a frantic whisper. We managed to avoid a catastrophic scandal thanks to your little stunt at the precinct, but do not think for 1 second you belong in this family anymore. You are a disgrace, Maya. You survived going to jail, but you are still just a broke nobody, managing run-down apartment buildings. Look around you. Look at the life your sister has secured for herself. Look at Brad. My mother gestured proudly toward the center of the room where Brad was holding court with my father and several wealthy church donors. Brad was grinning, flashing a Rolex, and holding up a crystal tumbler. He is a real man, Vivian sneered, turning her cold eyes back to my scar. He is not just marrying your sister. He is securing our family legacy. He is officially buying the Legacy Commercial Tower as Chloe's wedding gift. He is finalizing the paperwork this week. I kept my face completely blank, allowing absolutely zero emotion to betray the fireworks exploding in my mind. The Legacy Commercial Tower was a massive 30-story glass and steel monolith right in the heart of downtown Atlanta. For the past 5 years, my father had been obsessively preaching about acquiring that exact property. It was his ultimate dream. He wanted to convert the lower levels into a state-of-the-art broadcast center, to launch his own national religious television network. He wanted his megachurch to control the entire block. He had been praying for a miracle investor to help him secure the building because the current owner had refused every single lowball offer his church board had submitted. Now Brad, the hotshot finance bro, was stepping in to buy the building and hand it over to my father to cement his place as the savior of the family. It was a brilliant move on Brad's part. It would make him a hero to my parents and stroke Chloe's massive ego. There was only one massive, devastating problem with their perfect little fairy tale. They had absolutely no idea who actually owned the Legacy Commercial Tower. For years, my family had mocked my career. They called me a struggling freelance property manager who lived off scraps. They never bothered to actually look into the LLCs and holding companies I managed. If they had done even a basic background check, they would have realized I was not just managing properties for other people. I was building a massive real estate portfolio under a corporate trust. I was the anonymous majority shareholder of the investment group that owned the Legacy Commercial Tower. My father was currently raising a glass to toast the acquisition of a building that belonged entirely to the daughter he had tried to brutally disfigure 2 weeks ago. Brad noticed my mother cornering us and sauntered over with Chloe clinging to his arm like a designer handbag. Chloe looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust, as her eyes locked onto my facial scar. Brad offered a slick, patronizing smile. "So, this is the infamous older sister," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Vivian told me you had a little run-in with the law recently. It is a real shame you cannot get your life together, Maya. But hey, we are in a celebrating mood tonight. I am about to close the biggest real estate deal of my career and hand Pastor Marcus the keys to his new kingdom. You should stick around and take notes. You might actually learn how real business is done." Julian tensed beside me, his jaw clenching tight enough to crack a tooth, but I gently squeezed his hand to hold him back. I did not need Julian to destroy Brad. Brad was doing a spectacular job of walking right into the slaughterhouse all by himself. I smiled warmly, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. "I would not miss this for the world," I replied, my voice dripping with honey. "Congratulations, Chloe. You really did find a man who is going to give you exactly what you deserve." Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes and dragging Brad back toward the dance floor, while my mother shot me one last warning glare before following them. As soon as their backs were turned, I set my champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The glow of the screen illuminated my scar as I opened a secure messaging app connected directly to my lead financial assistant. I did not type out a long, emotional message. I did not hesitate. I typed 3 simple lines that would trigger the complete and utter financial ruin of my beloved family. Execute Phase 1. Jack up the Legacy Tower lease to own interest rate by 30%. Add the cross-collateralization clause. I hit send and slipped the phone back into my bag. By adding the cross-collateralization clause, I was ensuring that when Brad inevitably defaulted on the newly inflated astronomical interest payments, my holding company would not just seize the legacy tower back. We would have the legal right to seize every single asset Brad and my father tied to the loan. They were about to leverage the entire megachurch and every dime of their personal wealth to secure a building I already owned. I looked up at Julian, my smile turning genuinely dangerous. The trap was set and the feast was about to begin. I left Julian near the string quartet with a promise to return shortly. The heavy mahogany doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom ladies' room closed behind me, shutting out the sounds of clinking glass and forced laughter. The bathroom was a massive expanse of imported marble and gilded mirrors, completely empty. I walked over to the vanity and stared at my reflection. The angry red welt across my forehead stood out starkly against my skin. It was still tender to the touch, but I refused to cover it up with heavy makeup or bangs. I wanted my family to see it every single time they looked at me. I was tracing the jagged edge of the scar when the heavy wooden door swung open and slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sharp metallic snap. I did not even need to turn around. The overwhelming scent of Chloe's sickeningly sweet designer perfume announced her presence before she spoke a single word. "What exactly is your endgame here, Maya?" Chloe demanded, her voice echoing harshly off the marble tiles. "Do you think parading around with that hideous mark on your face is going to make people feel sorry for you? It just makes you look desperate and pathetic. You are ruining the aesthetic of my engagement party." I turned around slowly, leaning my hips against the cool stone counter. Chloe marched toward me, her diamond engagement ring catching the harsh vanity lighting. She was holding a crystal champagne flute in one hand and a small leather-bound checkbook in the other. She set her drink on the edge of the sink, pulled out a gold pen, and hastily scribbled across the paper. She ripped the check from the binding with an angry tear and threw the slip of paper directly at my chest. It fluttered to the floor, landing perfectly face up at the tip of my stilettos. "Take this and get some plastic surgery for that hideous scar," she sneered, picking her champagne back up. "It is for $5,000. That should be more than enough for someone like you to get it fixed at some cheap clinic. Just take the money and leave before Brad sees you again." I glanced down at the check, but made no move to pick it up. "You are throwing pennies at me in a bathroom, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Is Brad not giving you a high enough allowance yet, or did you have to beg Dad to transfer funds into your account before the party?" Chloe flushed her face, turning an ugly shade of crimson. Her eyes narrowed into dangerous slits as she took a step closer, invading my personal space. "You have absolutely no idea who you are messing with," she snapped, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "Brad is not just some local developer flipping residential homes like you do. He is dealing directly with Horizon Investment Fund. They are the most elite private equity firm in the entire state. They do not just give money to anyone, Maya. They chose Brad. They are fully backing his acquisition of the Legacy Tower." She puffed her chest out, completely intoxicated by a perceived power she had absolutely zero part in building. "With that kind of institutional power behind him, we are about to be completely untouchable," she bragged, her voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "My fiancé is going to hand our father the keys to his new television empire. You survived going to jail, but you are still just a broke nobody, managing rundown apartments. We are stepping into a billion-dollar tax bracket tonight. Do not embarrass us by existing in the same room. Just take the money, fix your face, and disappear before you ruin my perfect life." I looked at my younger sister, truly studying her for the first time tonight. She was shaking slightly, her knuckles white as she gripped her champagne flute. Behind all the bravado and designer labels, she was fundamentally terrified. She had spent her entire life having our parents pave the way for her. They covered up her mistakes and handed her victories she never earned. Now she was banking her entire future on a man she barely knew simply because he promised her the world. She needed to feel superior to me to validate her own hollow existence. I slowly reached down and picked up the check from the floor. Chloe smiled, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face as she assumed I was finally submitting to my role as the defeated older sister. She thought money had just solved her problem the way it always did for our family. I held the check up to the light, examining the messy signature. It was drawn on our parents' joint account, not hers. Typical Chloe. Then I placed my thumbs at the top edge of the paper and ripped it straight down the middle. Chloe gasped, taking a step back as I placed the halves together and tore them again. I kept tearing, moving with deliberate and agonizing slowness until the $5,000 bribe was reduced to a pile of tiny, worthless confetti. I took a step forward, backing her against the wall. Chloe froze, her triumphant smile vanishing as I raised my fist directly over her crystal champagne flute. I opened my fingers and let the shredded pieces of paper rain down into her bubbling drink. The ink immediately began to run, turning the expensive champagne into a cloudy, murky mess. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe shrieked, staring down at her ruined drink in absolute horror. "Are you completely insane? That was $5,000. I leaned in close enough to see the sheer panic swimming in her eyes. My voice dropped to a whisper that was colder than the marble beneath our feet. "You should really read the fine print on Horizon Fund's contracts, little sister." I watched her breath hitch as my words slowly registered in her mind, though she could not fully comprehend the trap closing around her. Their CEO is notoriously unforgiving. 2 days after the engagement party, the heavy oak doors of the Sanctuary of Grace executive suite were locked tight against the outside world. The air inside Pastor Marcus's private office was thick with the smell of stale coffee and raw, blinding panic. This room was a monument to hypocritical wealth, featuring imported Italian leather sofas, a massive mahogany desk, and a private elevator meant to keep the elite separate from the common congregation. But right now, the opulent space felt exactly like a prison cell. Brad paced the length of the Persian rug, aggressively wiping a layer of cold sweat from his forehead. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, slick-talking finance bro who had been holding court at the Ritz-Carlton. His custom-tailored jacket was tossed haphazardly over a velvet chair, and his silk tie was yanked loose around his neck. He ran a trembling hand through his slicked-back hair, completely dropping his untouchable wealthy facade. "I need the transfer today, Marcus," Brad said, his voice cracking with undeniable desperation. "Horizon Investment Fund is not messing around. They rejected my initial asset portfolio outright. They are demanding a minimum of $20 million in verified liquid collateral by close of business tomorrow, or they pull the financing for the Legacy Tower. If they pull out, the whole deal collapses and I am finished." My father sat behind his massive desk, gripping a gold-plated pen so tightly his knuckles were stark white. "Keep your voice down," he snapped, shooting a paranoid glare toward the locked double doors. "You told me you had the capital, Brad. You sat in my formal dining room, ate my food, and swore to my face that your firm was liquid enough to cover the down payment. You promised me that building." Brad let out a harsh, humorless laugh that bordered on a sob. "I lied, Marcus. I am completely over-leveraged. My last 3 commercial flips tanked spectacularly, and the banks are breathing down my neck, threatening to seize my assets. I do not have $20 million. I do not even have $2 million. I have just enough credit to keep up appearances for Chloe and your high society friends. If Horizon looks too closely at my personal accounts, they will see I am functionally bankrupt. I am drowning here." My father closed his eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath as the reality of his future son-in-law's absolute financial ruin washed over him. He could not back out now. He had already bragged to his entire congregation, his board of directors, and every elite donor in Atlanta that the church was acquiring the Legacy Tower. He had promised them a global television network that would cement his legacy. If he failed to deliver, his pristine reputation would shatter overnight. He would become a laughingstock, and his massive, fragile ego could never survive that kind of public humiliation. "I will handle the collateral," my father finally said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, calculated whisper. "I am going to initiate a commercial remortgage on the megachurch property. I own the deed to the sanctuary and the surrounding 3 acres outright. I am also putting up the family mansion in Buckhead." Brad stopped pacing, dead in his tracks, staring at my father with wide, terrified eyes. "Are you insane? If Horizon calls those loans and you default, you will lose your home and your church. You will be living on the street." "I am not going to default," my father sneered, slamming his fist onto the polished wood of his desk. "This is a divine acquisition. God wants me to have that tower, and I am going to take it. But the mortgages will not clear fast enough to satisfy Horizon's deadline tomorrow. We need immediate liquid cash to secure the contract today." My father pulled his laptop closer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he opened a secure banking portal that required dual authentication. "I am transferring $8 million from the congregation's Global Mission Fund into your LLC's holding account. You will wire it directly to Horizon as your personal earnest money to satisfy their liquidity requirement." Brad swallowed hard, taking a terrified step back from the desk. "That is embezzlement, Marcus. That is federal prison time for both of us if the church board finds out you are using congregation tithes to fund a commercial real estate deal." "The board will not find out," my father growled, clicking the transfer authorization button without a second of hesitation. "It is a temporary bridge loan from the Lord. As soon as the Legacy Tower is generating broadcast revenue, I will put the money right back and no one will be the wiser. Just take the wire confirmation to Horizon and get that contract signed today. We are going to be untouchable, Brad. We are the elite. No one questions a man of God." Across town, high on the top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper, I sat behind my own desk. My office was a masterpiece of minimalist power featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The Legacy Tower stood prominently in my line of sight, a building I already owned free and clear. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair watching the digital numbers scroll across my encrypted monitors. I was not just a freelance property manager. I was the anonymous founder and chief executive officer of Horizon Investment Fund. I had built the private equity firm from the ground up, after my family discarded me ruthlessly, acquiring assets and absorbing failing businesses until I controlled a massive percentage of the city's commercial real estate. My family was so blinded by their own arrogance and obsession with status, they never bothered to look past the corporate shell companies hiding my real identity. The private elevator chimed, and Julian stepped into my office. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, looking every bit the lethal corporate attorney he was born to be. He held a sleek silver tablet in his hand, a predatory smile playing on his lips as he crossed the room. "You are going to want to see this," Maya Julian said, walking around my desk and sliding the tablet directly in front of me. "Brad and your father just submitted their final collateral portfolio to secure the Legacy Tower loan." I scrolled through the digital documents, my eyes scanning the heavily encrypted financial data. My father had actually done it. He had legally signed over the deed to the megachurch. He had signed over the title to his $10 million Buckhead mansion. And right at the bottom of the digital file was the official wire transfer confirmation for $8 million. I tapped the routing number, tracing the exact origin of the funds. My smile widened into a cold, calculated grin as the pieces locked into place. "He stole from his own congregation," I said, my voice echoing softly in the quiet office. "He drained the charity accounts to pay his fake billionaire future son-in-law. He has handed me the literal keys to his entire kingdom." Julian leaned down, resting his hands on the back of my chair. He looked at the screen and then looked out the window toward the skyline. "They are completely exposed," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, deadly tone he reserved for total courtroom victories. "The interest rates you set are astronomical, and the cross-collateralization clause is ironclad. They will inevitably default on the first payment. If they sign this, you legally own everything they have." I picked up my favorite silver fountain pen, twirling it slowly between my fingers. I thought about the heavy brick smashing into my face. I thought about the cold metal handcuffs Officer Jenkins had tightened around my wrists while my father played the righteous victim. They wanted to destroy me just for existing. Now I was going to erase their entire legacy with a single stroke of a pen. I set the pen down and looked up at Julian, meeting his blazing blue eyes. "Send them the final draft." Julian tapped the screen, authorizing the digital transmission. Within seconds, the heavily encrypted financial death warrant was flying through cyberspace directly into Brad's inbox. We had him. We had all of them. My phone vibrated violently against the sleek mahogany surface of my desk, shattering the quiet hum of the office. I glanced down to see my mother's name flashing on the caller ID. Vivian rarely called me unless she needed a scapegoat or an audience for her latest triumph. I swiped accept and placed the device flat on my desk, putting the call on speaker so Julian could hear every single word. Maya. I am calling out of the goodness of my heart, Vivian announced, her voice pouring through the speaker, dripping with unearned arrogance and condescension. We are heading to the Horizon Investment Fund headquarters tomorrow morning for the final contract signing. Brad has secured the Legacy Tower. Your father is going to sign the final church endorsements. I want you there in the lobby to witness true success. It might actually inspire you to stop living such a pathetic life. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands on the armrests. You want me at a private financial signing, Vivian? She let out a sharp little laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I want you to see what a top-tier provider looks like. Chloe is marrying a man who can hand your father the world. Brad is negotiating with billionaires, Maya. Billionaires. Meanwhile, you are stuck with that arrogant lawyer who could not even keep you out of handcuffs last week. I suppose Julian talks a big game, but when it comes to real power, he is nothing compared to Brad. We are about to be untouchable. I expect you to be in the lobby at 10 sharp. Try to wear something that does not look like it came off a clearance rack. Do not embarrass us by looking like a charity case. She ended the call with a sharp click before I could even formulate a response. I looked up at Julian. His blue eyes danced with cold, calculated amusement. He crossed his arms over his chest, completely unbothered by my mother's delusional insults. He knew exactly what was coming. The next morning, the Atlanta sky was a crisp, cloudless blue. The air was cool and sharp, matching my exact mood. I did not dress like the struggling freelance property manager my family believed me to be. I stood in front of my expansive walk-in closet and selected my armor for the final slaughter. I chose a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit in a deep, striking charcoal. The fabric draped flawlessly over my frame, radiating absolute power and unforgiving control. I paired it with a silk emerald blouse that brought out the coldness in my eyes, and black Christian Louboutin stilettos that clicked like loaded weapons against the hardwood floor. I pulled my dark hair tightly back into a sleek, severe chignon. I did not touch a single drop of concealer. I let the jagged pink scar on my forehead remain completely exposed. It was a stark, violent contrast to the immaculate tailoring of my suit. That scar was the physical proof of my father's absolute hypocrisy, and I wanted him to stare at it while I dismantled his entire world piece by piece. I wanted him to see the mark he made on me right before I took everything he loved. Julian drove us to the Horizon Investment Fund headquarters in his sleek black Aston Martin. The building was a towering monument of modern financial architecture, featuring a sweeping glass facade that reflected the morning sun like a beacon of wealth. I stepped out of the car, feeling the crisp morning air against my skin. The heavy revolving doors swallowed us as we entered the massive marble lobby. The space was intimidating by design, featuring soaring 40-foot ceilings, waterfalls cascading down slate walls, and security guards stationed at every single entry point. My mother, father, Chloe, and Brad were already standing near the central reception desk. Vivian was wearing a ridiculous oversized sun hat indoors, looking like she belonged at a cheap country club rather than a global investment firm. Chloe was clinging to Brad's arm, flashing her diamond ring at anyone who walked past. Brad was pacing nervously, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest. He was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. My father stood tall, wearing his best preaching suit, trying to project an aura of holy authority. They looked like a group of desperate tourists trying to blend in with the financial elite. Vivian spotted me first. Her eyes immediately darted to my designer suit, and a flash of confused irritation crossed her face. She opened her mouth, preparing to unleash another barrage of insults about my presence. She took a step forward, raising her hand to point at me. Before she could speak a single word, I ignored her completely and walked directly past them toward the secured executive elevators. The moment my stilettos hit the polished marble of the inner atrium, the entire atmosphere of the building shifted. The head of security, a towering former Marine named Jackson, immediately snapped to attention. He stepped out from behind his podium, his posture perfectly straight. "Good morning, boss," he stated, his voice booming with authority across the quiet lobby. At the sound of his greeting, the three receptionists manning the front desk immediately stood up from their ergonomic chairs. They straightened their postures and bowed their heads slightly in deep, absolute respect. Two senior portfolio managers crossing the lobby stopped dead in their tracks, lowering their briefcases and offering deferential nods as I walked past. The entire ground floor of the massive corporation ground to a halt to acknowledge my arrival. I could feel the sudden suffocating silence radiating from my family behind me. The air in the lobby grew thick with shock. I stopped at the private executive elevator bank and turned around slowly. Vivian had dropped her designer handbag on the floor. My father was staring at me with his mouth hanging wide open, his face completely drained of blood. Chloe looked like she had just seen a ghost. Brad was trembling, gripping his briefcase so hard his knuckles were white. He was looking between the security guards and me, his eyes wide with raw, unadulterated terror. The struggling freelance property manager they had spent years mocking was not just a guest in this building. I was the architect of their impending doom and the undisputed boss of the most powerful investment fund in the state. The executive boardroom of Horizon Investment Fund occupied the entire top floor of the skyscraper. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a sweeping, unobstructed view of the Atlanta skyline, including the gleaming spire of the Legacy Tower, right in the center of the horizon. The centerpiece of the room was a massive conference table carved from a single slab of black walnut, surrounded by 20 ergonomic chairs upholstered in imported Italian leather. Marcus, Vivian, Chloe, and Brad sat grouped together at the far end of the table. They were completely insulated by their own toxic arrogance. Despite witnessing the security team acknowledge me in the lobby downstairs, their desperate minds had immediately constructed a convenient lie to protect their fragile egos. Vivian had loudly whispered in the elevator that I must have conned my way into a low-level administrative role, or compromised myself with a wealthy executive to get in the door. They simply could not fathom that I held any real power. They needed me to be a failure to justify their own miserable existence. Brad leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his legs and resting his custom Italian loafers directly on the polished walnut table. He exuded the unearned confidence of a man who believed he had just outsmarted the entire financial universe. "You have absolutely nothing to worry about," Marcus, Brad said, waving a dismissive hand toward the Atlanta skyline. "These faceless corporate suits are all exactly the same. They are entirely predictable and completely driven by greed." I fed their underwriting department a heavily sanitized version of our financials, and they swallowed it whole. They were so eager to secure a high-profile client like my firm that they completely bypassed the secondary audit. We locked them into a fixed-rate deal that practically gives us the Legacy Tower for free. I manipulated them from the very first handshake. My father nodded, his chest puffed out with righteous pride. He adjusted the gold cross lapel pin on his tailored suit jacket. "You did well, Brad. The Lord always works through the clever and the bold. Once that contract is signed, the megachurch expansion is officially secured. We will have the largest religious broadcast center in the entire Southeast, and no one will ever question the financial integrity of this family again. We are entering a new stratosphere." Vivian smiled, tracing the rim of her empty water glass with a perfectly manicured fingernail. "It is about time we elevated our circle," she murmured, her eyes gleaming with greed. The people at the Ritz-Carlton engagement party were practically begging for our attention. Once we control that tower, we will dictate exactly who belongs in Atlanta high society. We will be the gatekeepers. Chloe ignored the conversation entirely. She was too busy examining her reflection in her compact mirror and complaining about the hospitality. She slammed her hand down on the call button embedded in the conference table. Less than 30 seconds later, a sharply dressed executive assistant stepped into the room holding a silver tray. "Are we expected to just sit here and dehydrate while your boss takes his sweet time?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill and dripping with absolute entitlement. "We are closing a multi-million-dollar acquisition today. I want premium champagne." Bring us a bottle of your best vintage and make sure the crystal is actually clean this time. The assistant maintained a perfectly blank professional expression. She offered a slight deferential nod. I will relay your request to the chief executive officer, ma'am. She turned and exited the room, leaving the heavy silence of anticipation in her wake. Brad chuckled, checking his diamond-encrusted Rolex. Do not worry, babe. The CEO is probably just reviewing the final cross-collateralization clause. He thinks he holds the leverage, but I buried the church deed and the mansion title so deep in the corporate holding shells that Horizon will never be able to claim them, even if we miss a payment. I outmaneuvered their entire legal team. We hold all the cards today. We are playing chess while they are playing checkers. Just as the words left his mouth, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. The heavy thud of the solid oak hitting the wall stoppers echoed like a gunshot. The arrogant chatter died instantly. I walked into the room. I did not carry a clipboard or a tray of champagne. I held a single sleek leather portfolio. Julian flanked me on my right, radiating cold, lethal energy. Two senior vice presidents of the Horizon Underwriting Division walked on my left, carrying stacks of verified financial documents. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at my sister. I kept my gaze locked dead ahead as I walked the entire length of the black walnut table. The sharp click of my Christian Louboutin stilettos shattered the dead silence of the room. I reached the head of the table, the chair reserved exclusively for the supreme authority of the firm. I pulled the chair out smoothly and sat down. Julian took his place standing directly behind my right shoulder, while the vice presidents took their seats to my left. I placed the leather portfolio flat on the table and opened it, revealing the final acquisition contract for the Legacy Tower. For 10 agonizing seconds, the room was completely paralyzed. The sheer impossibility of the moment short-circuited their brains. They stared at me sitting in the seat of power wearing a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit with the jagged facial scar fully exposed under the harsh boardroom lights. I was no longer playing the victim. I was the executioner. My father was the first to break the silence. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. He slammed both hands flat against the table and shot up from his chair, knocking it backward. "What the hell are you doing in the CEO's chair?" he bellowed, his booming preacher's voice vibrating against the glass walls. "Have you completely lost your mind, Maya? This is a secure financial meeting. You cannot just sneak in here to play your pathetic little games. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing. You are going to ruin the most important deal of my life." Vivian stood up right next to him, her face twisted into a mask of pure panic and rage. "Security!" she shrieked, looking wildly toward the doors. "Someone call the guards. Remove this woman immediately." Chloe clutched Brad's arm, her eyes wide with terror as she realized the girl she had just tried to bribe in a bathroom was now sitting at the head of a billion-dollar table. Brad was frozen in place, the color completely drained from his face as his eyes darted from the senior vice presidents to the heavy brass nameplate resting on the desk directly in front of me. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not call for security. I looked directly into my father's furious, panicked eyes. I offered him a smile that contained zero warmth and absolute destruction. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my silver fountain pen. I slowly pulled the contract toward me. "I am just here to sign my name, Pastor." The silver nib of my fountain pen glided effortlessly across the signature line. I looped the final letter of my name with a sharp, deliberate flourish and set the pen down on the black walnut table. The soft click echoed like a judge striking a gavel. I pushed the executed contract back toward the center of the table and leaned back in the heavy leather chair. "Allow me to formally introduce myself." I said, my voice perfectly level. "I am Maya Caldwell, founder and chief executive officer of Horizon Investment Fund. Welcome to my building." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of suffocating vacuum that occurs right after a bomb detonates, before the shockwave tears everything apart. Marcus stood frozen, his chest heaving under his tailored suit, his face draining of all color until he looked like a wax corpse. Vivian slumped back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish suffocating on dry land. The oversized sun hat she wore suddenly looked completely ridiculous. "You are lying!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a manicured finger at me. "You are a broke, pathetic loser. You live in a tiny apartment. You cannot possibly own this company. This is a prank. It is an illegal stunt." I ignored her hysterical outburst and kept my eyes locked on my father. He was staring at the signature on the contract, his hands trembling violently. The reality of his absolute ruin was finally penetrating his colossal ego. "You see, Marcus?" I continued, standing up slowly and buttoning the single button of my charcoal suit. "For the last 10 years, you all treated me like a disease. You threw me out like garbage because I refused to play the role of the obedient, silent daughter in your hypocritical holy empire. You told your congregation I was a lost soul. You told your wealthy friends I was a failure. But you never bothered to check what I was actually doing in the shadows." I began to pace slowly down the length of the boardroom, the click of my stilettos matching the pounding pulse in the room. "While you were buying Chloe brand new Porsches using stolen church donations, I was buying distressed commercial properties. While you were dripping in diamonds bought with the Global Mission Fund, I was ruthlessly liquidating failing businesses and absorbing their assets." I stopped pacing and leaned forward, resting my hands on the table directly across from my mother. "While you called me a pathetic failure, I was buying the very bank that currently holds the mortgages to your megachurch and your precious Buckhead mansion." Vivian gasped, pressing a trembling hand over her chest. "You bought our bank?" she whispered, her voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant venom. "I bought everything, Vivian," I replied coldly. "Every loan, every deed, every line of credit. I built Horizon Investment Fund from a single laptop in a studio apartment into the largest private equity firm in the Southeast. And I did it entirely without your tainted money or your fake prayers." Brad was hyperventilating. He was staring at the finalized contract, realizing exactly what the cross-collateralization clause truly meant. He had handed me the legal right to seize every single asset he and my father possessed the second they defaulted. And he knew better than anyone that he did not have the $20 million required to stop it. "This is fraud," Brad yelled, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "You misrepresented yourself. This contract is completely null and void. You cannot enforce these terms." He lunged forward, launching his body across the polished walnut table. His hand desperately scrambled toward the signed documents, aiming to rip them to shreds. Before his fingers could even brush the heavy paper, Julian moved. He was faster and far more lethal than anyone expected from a man wearing an impeccable designer suit. Julian sidestepped me and slammed his hand down squarely on Brad's wrist, pinning the man's arm violently against the table. At the exact same second, the heavy boardroom doors flew open. Jackson, the towering head of security, stormed in, flanked by 4 massive guards dressed in tactical black. They immediately surrounded the table, blocking every possible exit. "Touch that document again, and I will happily let Jackson snap your arm in two," Julian warned, his voice a dangerous silken threat. He smoothly slid the contract out of Brad's reach and handed it to one of the senior vice presidents. "For the record, my name is Julian Pierce. I am the chief legal counsel for Horizon Investment Fund. Everything my client just signed is ironclad, completely legal, and entirely enforceable. You submitted the collateral voluntarily, you signed the terms willingly, you dug your own grave." Brad yanked his arm back, stumbling into his chair. He buried his face in his trembling hands, making a pathetic whimpering sound. He knew it was over. He was completely trapped. Chloe was losing her mind. She ripped her arm away from Brad and stood up, her face red and distorted with fury. "You are a freak, Maya," she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me. You are just trying to ruin my life because I am beautiful and I am marrying a billionaire. Brad is going to destroy you. He is going to hire real lawyers and crush your stupid fake company. Tell her, Brad. Tell her you are going to bankrupt her." Brad did not look up. He just kept shaking his head violently, his shoulders heaving. My father finally found his voice. It was a weak, gravelly rasp, completely stripped of his usual booming authority. Maya, please, he choked out, gripping the edge of the table to keep himself from collapsing. I am your father. You cannot do this to your own family. The church, the congregation, my entire legacy. You will destroy everything I built. You destroyed it yourself the second you embezzled $8 million to fund this scam. I shot back, refusing to give him a single ounce of mercy. I just handed you the rope. I turned my attention back to my sister. Chloe was still breathing heavily, glaring at me with absolute toxic hatred. She was clinging so desperately to the illusion of her wealthy, perfect life that she could not see the massive black hole opening up right beneath her feet. She still believed Brad was her ultimate prize, her ticket to untouchable elite status. I walked back to the head of the table and picked up a thick, heavy red folder that Julian had brought into the room. It was packed with hundreds of pages of highly classified financial forensics, bank statements, wire transfers, and encrypted emails. Everything my team had uncovered during our ruthless audit of Brad's crumbling empire. I looked at my sister, letting a cold, unforgiving smile spread across my face. I pitched the heavy red folder across the slick surface of the table. It slid rapidly, stopping only when it slammed directly into Chloe's chest, forcing her to stumble backward to catch it. Your white knight is a fraud, Chloe, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a steel blade. Open it. Chloe's trembling fingers fumbled with the brass clasp of the heavy red folder. The thick cardstock cover flipped open, and a cascade of highly classified financial documents spilled across the polished black walnut table. The glossy facade of her perfect billionaire romance shattered in real time as her manicured hands sifted through the papers. These were not the immaculate asset portfolios Brad had flaunted at country club dinners. These were aggressive, heavily redacted legal filings stamped with aggressive red ink. There were official notices of default from 3 different international banks. There were aggressive collection demands from private offshore lenders. Chloe picked up a bank statement, her eyes darting back and forth across the highlighted columns. Her perfectly contoured face went completely pale. Brad, she whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. Brad, what is this? It says your primary holding account is overdrawn by $2 million. It says you have 4 pending fraud lawsuits from your last commercial real estate flips in Miami. Brad did not answer. He was backed into the corner of his luxurious leather chair, looking like a trapped animal. He refused to meet her gaze, keeping his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Let me translate those documents for you, Chloe, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy boardroom air with clinical precision. Your perfect, top-tier provider is functionally bankrupt. He does not have $20 million. He does not have $2 million. He is currently drowning in predatory debt and facing imminent federal indictment for wire fraud. Every designer handbag he bought you, every luxury car he leased, every lavish vacation he promised you was financed by money he stole from his previous investors. Vivian let out a sharp, breathless gasp, gripping the edge of the conference table to steady herself. Her oversized sun hat slipped backward, revealing her wide, horrified eyes. No, she stammered, shaking her head in violent denial. No, that is impossible. Brad comes from legacy wealth. He is a prominent developer. He showed us the deeds. He showed us the blueprints for the legacy tower. He showed you high-quality graphic design printed on expensive paper. Vivian, I corrected, shifting my gaze to my mother. He is a parasite. And he specifically targeted your family because he smelled your desperate, suffocating need for validation from a mile away. I stood up slowly, resting my palms flat against the cool wood of the conference table. I wanted them to feel the full, crushing weight of their own monumental stupidity. While you were busy buying Chloe imported sports cars with stolen church donations, I was quietly buying up distressed commercial properties across the entire eastern seaboard. I explained, my voice echoing off the glass walls. While you were openly mocking me at family dinners, calling me a pathetic failure, I was systematically acquiring the exact financial institutions that hold the mortgages to your megachurch and your precious Buckhead mansion. And while you were busy worshiping this fake finance bro because he wore a nice suit and played golf with the right people, he was plotting to completely destroy you. Chloe dropped the financial documents as if they had suddenly caught fire. She spun around to face Brad, her diamond engagement ring catching the harsh overhead lights. "Tell me she is lying, Brad," she shrieked, her voice echoing hysterically. "Tell me you are actually buying me that penthouse. Tell me we are acquiring this tower today." "Brad is not buying you a building, Chloe," I stated, cutting off any chance he had to spin another lie. "He never intended to buy the Legacy Tower. Look at the final page of the contract you were all so eager to sign today." Marcus snatched the contract from the center of the table, his eyes frantically scanning the dense legal jargon. His hands shook so violently the paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. "That contract is not a commercial real estate acquisition." I continued, spelling out the exact mechanics of their ruin. "It is a predatory high-interest cross-collateralized loan. If you had signed that paper, Marcus, the equity of your entire megachurch and your family mansion would not have gone toward purchasing the Legacy Tower. The contract explicitly authorizes the immediate transfer of those assets directly to Brad's offshore creditors in the Cayman Islands. He was going to use your absolute blind greed to pay off his mob debts, save his own skin, and leave you holding an empty bag." Brad suddenly lunged forward. His survival instinct kicked in, overriding his paralyzing fear. He reached across the table, his fingers clawing desperately for the contract in Marcus' hands. "Give it to me!" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "That is my intellectual property. You have no right to review those terms." Julian stepped directly into Brad's path, his movement incredibly fast and fluid. He grabbed Brad by the front of his tailored shirt and shoved him effortlessly back into the heavy leather chair. The 4 tactical security guards instantly stepped forward, their hands resting casually but deliberately on their utility belts. "I highly suggest you remain seated," Julian advised, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "As Chief Legal Counsel for Horizon, I can assure you that any further aggressive movements will result in your immediate physical removal from this building, and I promise you will not walk out under your own power." Brad sank back into his chair, completely defeated. He stared at the floor, his chest heaving, his perfect slicked-back hair falling loosely across his forehead. Marcus stood frozen. The reality of what had almost happened slammed into him with the force of a freight train. He had just wired $8 million of his congregation's global mission fund to this man. He had been exactly one signature away from signing over the deed to the Sanctuary of Grace and the title to his family home. He had almost lost everything he had spent decades building simply because he was too arrogant to read the fine print. The holy facade shattered completely. The polished, charismatic pastor vanished entirely, replaced by a desperate, enraged man who had just been played for an absolute fool. "You son of a bitch," Marcus roared, his booming voice rattling the crystal glasses on the table. Marcus lunged across the distance separating them. He grabbed Brad by the collar of his expensive custom-tailored jacket, lifting the younger man halfway out of his seat. He shook him violently, his face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. "I trusted you," Marcus screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I opened my home to you. I brought you into my sanctuary. I wired you the Lord's money. You were going to steal my church. You were going to leave me bankrupt on the street." For a moment, Brad looked terrified. But as Marcus continued to shake him, the sheer adrenaline and humiliation triggered something vicious inside the fake finance broker. The polite, wealthy gentleman routine dissolved completely. Brad grabbed Marcus' wrists, gripping them with sudden, violent strength. He ripped Marcus' hands off his collar and shoved the older man backward with a brutal, forceful thrust. Marcus stumbled, his dress shoes slipping on the polished marble floor. He crashed hard into the edge of the conference table, knocking over a pitcher of ice water that shattered loudly against the floorboards. Brad stood up, straightening his ruined jacket. He looked down at the disgraced pastor, then sneered at Vivian and Chloe, who were cowering in shock. His lip curled into a nasty, unforgiving snarl. "You status-obsessed fools were so eager to have a white finance bro in the family, you did not even run a background check." The brutal honesty of Brad's statement hung in the sterile boardroom air like a toxic cloud. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. The polished facade of the Sanctuary of Grace Empire had been completely stripped away, leaving nothing but raw, desperate ugliness. Then Vivian snapped. The reality of losing her elite status, her country club memberships, and her absolute power over the congregation broke whatever fragile grip she still had on her sanity. But she did not attack Brad. She did not attack the man who had just admitted to conning her favorite daughter. Her deeply ingrained toxic conditioning demanded a scapegoat, and she immediately locked her furious eyes entirely on me. "You planned this!" She shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls with a pitch so high it sounded inhuman. "You set us up, Maya. You orchestrated this entire humiliation because you are a bitter, jealous little girl who cannot stand to see your sister happy." Vivian lunged across the polished floor. Her manicured hands curled into claws as she swung her arm back, aiming a vicious, open-handed slap directly at my scarred face. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply raised my arm and caught her wrist in midair. My grip was like iron locking around her delicate bones with bone-bruising force. Vivian gasped in shock, struggling to yank her arm away, but I held her firmly in place. I let her feel the absolute physical difference between us. I was no longer the terrified child she used to lock in the basement. I was a woman who had survived everything they had thrown at me, and I was unmovable. "Do not ever try to strike me again," I warned, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "Let me go," Vivian whimpered, her arrogant bravado evaporating as she looked into my eyes and saw absolutely zero mercy. "You are hurting me, Maya." I tightened my grip just enough to make her wince before I started tearing down decades of her hypocritical enabling. "You want to talk about being hurt, Vivian? Let us talk about your unique definition of motherhood. You watched Marcus throw heavy ceramic plates at my head when I was 12 years old. You deliberately bought extra heavy concealer to cover the bruises on my arms before Sunday service so the church choir would not ask any uncomfortable questions. You enabled a monster because you liked the designer dresses and the front row seats at the charity galas. I stepped closer, forcing her to look at the jagged red scar cutting across my forehead. You stood in that hospital room and told me I deserved this. I continued my words, striking her like physical blows. You told me to see if Julian would still love a scarred woman. Let us see if your congregation still loves a bankrupt, abusive fraud. I released her wrist with a sharp shove, pushing her backward. Vivian stumbled, her expensive heels slipping on the marble as she collapsed into an empty chair, weeping uncontrollably. Marcus had finally managed to pull himself up from the floor. He was leaning heavily against the edge of the conference table, his chest heaving, his pristine preaching suit rumpled and stained with spilled water. He looked frantically between Brad and the unsigned contract resting on the table. "You are a demon!" Maya Marcus spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of hatred and desperate relief. "But your little trap failed. I did not sign the final transfer. The megachurch deed is still mine. The house in Buckhead is still mine. You did not get my signature. I am logging into the portal right now and pulling my $8 million back from your escrow account. The deal is dead and you get absolutely nothing." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his smartphone with shaky fingers. He was so incredibly arrogant he actually thought he had found a loophole. I folded my arms across my chest, watching him tap desperately at his screen. Julian stepped forward, a dark, predatory smile playing on his lips as he adjusted his suit jacket. "I would not bother checking your balance," Pastor Julian said smoothly. "Horizon Investment Fund escrow accounts are legally domiciled in Delaware. Which brings us to a rather unfortunate jurisdictional issue for you." Marcus stopped, tapping his eyes, darting toward Julian. "What are you talking about? It was a simple wire transfer. I am reversing it." "You cannot reverse it, Marcus," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him, "because you did not just send money across town. When you initiated that earnest money deposit to secure a commercial real estate contract, you moved $8 million of untaxed charitable congregation funds across state lines. You bypassed the church board of directors. You bypassed the financial oversight committee. You authorized the movement of those funds under the false pretense of a corporate acquisition." Marcus went completely rigid. The smartphone slipped from his sweaty fingers, clattering loudly against the floor. "Do you understand what that means?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. You do not need to sign the final contract to commit a crime. The second you hit send on that wire transfer, you committed federal wire fraud. That $8 million triggered an automatic regulatory freeze the moment it hit our Delaware accounts, because the origin of the funds did not match the commercial entity filing the application. Horizon is legally obligated to hold those funds pending a full federal investigation. No, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. No, no, no. That is church money. If I do not put it back by Sunday, the board will demand an audit. They will call the bank. They will realize it is missing. They are going to realize a lot more than that, I promised, reaching into my pocket. Marcus fell to his knees. The great untouchable pastor of the Sanctuary of Grace was physically crumbling in front of me. He clasped his hands together, looking up at me with tears streaming down his face. Maya, please, he begged, openly sobbing. I am your father. I gave you life. If the federal government audits my accounts, I will go to prison. I will lose the church. I will lose everything. Please just send the money back. I will do anything you want. I will publicly apologize. I will give you whatever you demand. I looked down at the pathetic broken man kneeling on the floor. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just the cold, clean closure of absolute justice. I pulled a small, sleek remote control from my pocket. It was synced directly to the massive flat-screen television mounted on the boardroom wall and tied into the Horizon Secure server. I do not want your apologies, Marcus, I said, holding the remote up. And I do not want your money. I just want the truth. I pressed my thumb against the primary transmission button. A soft chime echoed through the boardroom, indicating a mass digital file transfer had just been successfully completed. Oh, by the way, remember that video of you smashing a brick into my face? I asked, my voice echoing with terrifying finality. I just forwarded it to the church's board of elders and the Atlanta Police Department. The real one this time. The soft chime of the digital transfer faded into the dead silence of the boardroom. For a long, agonizing second, the only sound was the ragged, panicked breathing of the people who had just watched their entire empire vaporize. Then a new sound began to rise from the streets below. It started as a faint mechanical wail echoing off the concrete and glass canyons of the Atlanta skyline. Within seconds, the sound multiplied and amplified. The unmistakable shriek of multiple police sirens tore through the heavy soundproof glass of the boardroom. The red and blue emergency lights began to reflect off the surrounding skyscrapers, casting chaotic strobe effects across the polished black walnut table. The sirens were not passing by. They were converging directly on the plaza of the Legacy Tower. Vivian let out a strangled gasp and collapsed completely into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Chloe began to scream, a high-pitched, continuous sound of pure, unfiltered terror as the reality of the approaching police finally broke through her vanity. Marcus scrambled backward on the floor, his expensive dress shoes scrambling for traction on the imported carpet. He looked wildly at the flashing lights outside the window and then turned his terrified gaze back to me. The arrogant, untouchable megachurch pastor was completely gone. In his place was a cornered, desperate coward. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, completely abandoning whatever shred of dignity he had left. He reached out with trembling hands, attempting to grab the hem of my trousers. Julian instantly stepped forward, his hand dropping to his side, but I held up a single finger to stop him. I looked down at the pathetic man crying at my feet. Maya, please. Marcus sobbed, tears streaming down his flushed face and soaking into his starched collar. You cannot do this. You have to call them off. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them the video is a fake. I am your father. We are family Maya. We share the same blood. You cannot send your own blood to prison. The Lord commands us to forgive. You have to forgive me. I stared down at him, feeling the absolute zero temperature of my own heart. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I just felt the satisfying weight of closure. I stepped back, forcing his grasping hands to fall onto the empty carpet. You want to talk about blood, Marcus? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous razor-sharp whisper that cut perfectly through the sound of the blaring sirens outside. Let us talk about blood. Let us talk about the blood that was pouring down my face while I lay on the concrete floor of the garage. Let us talk about how my blood soaked into my clothes while you stood over me holding that brick and laughed. You laughed at me while I choked on my own blood. You did not care about family then. You did not care about forgiveness. You just cared about making sure I knew exactly how worthless you thought I was. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head in violent denial as if he could physically erase the memory. I was angry, he pleaded, his voice cracking. The devil took hold of me, Maya. I am a man of God, but I am flawed. You have to show mercy. I am not God. Marcus, I replied coldly, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. I am the executioner, and I am fresh out of mercy. The lead detective did not hesitate. He signaled his team, and 2 officers immediately hauled Marcus up from the carpet, forcing his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the boardroom was the final punctuation mark on his illustrious career. Marcus went limp, his knees buckling as the officers hoisted him to his feet. He did not look like a powerful spiritual leader anymore. He looked like an aging, pathetic criminal. Vivian screamed, lunging forward, but Jackson's security team easily blocked her path, forming a solid wall of muscle between her and the arresting officers. Chloe just sat frozen in her leather chair, staring blankly at her empty ring finger, as her father was marched out of the Horizon Investment Fund building. By 6 o'clock that evening, the news hit Atlanta like a seismic event. Every major network interrupted their regular programming to cover the spectacular collapse of the city's most prominent religious empire. I sat in my penthouse suite, swirling a glass of sparkling water as the breaking news banner flashed in bold red letters across the bottom of the screen. Megachurch pastor arrested for brutal attack on daughter, embezzlement charges pending. The anchor, a polished woman with a grave expression, stared directly into the camera. We have breaking developments in the shocking arrest of Marcus Caldwell, founder of the Sanctuary of Grace. Authorities have confirmed that Reverend Caldwell is facing felony charges for aggravated assault after a disturbing video surfaced online earlier today. But the scandal goes much deeper than physical violence. The screen cut to a financial correspondent standing outside the locked iron gates of the Sanctuary of Grace. That is right, Sarah, the correspondent reported, holding a thick stack of printed legal filings. Federal investigators are currently freezing all assets connected to the Caldwell family. Sources confirm that Reverend Caldwell illegally initiated an $8 million wire transfer using untaxed congregation funds to secure a high-interest predatory loan. The anchor shook her head, visibly appalled. And what about the church property itself, Tom? It is completely gone, the correspondent replied bluntly. Caldwell signed a cross-collateralization clause, leveraging the church deed and his Buckhead mansion as collateral for an offshore commercial acquisition initiated by a disgraced associate named Brad Sterling. Because Caldwell bypassed the church board and embezzled the earnest money, the primary lender has initiated immediate foreclosure. That lender is a subsidiary of Horizon Investment Fund. They are seizing the mega church, the mansion, and all connected assets by the end of the week. The Caldwells are officially bankrupt. The social execution was even faster and far more brutal than the financial one. The Caldwell women had spent their entire lives cultivating a pristine, untouchable image among the city's elite. They demanded front-row seats at charity galas and exclusive tables at Michelin-starred restaurants. But status in that world is incredibly fragile when it is built entirely on stolen money. The moment the news broadcast ended, their phones went completely silent. No one returned Vivian's panicked voicemails. The women she played tennis with suddenly blocked her number. The luxury boutiques in Buckhead quietly removed her name from their VIP client lists. They were completely radioactive. The very next morning, Vivian decided to fight reality. Her delusion was so deeply entrenched that she actually believed she could simply show up for her weekly mimosa brunch at the Piedmont Elite Country Club and charm her way out of a federal indictment. She dragged a shell-shocked Chloe out of their soon-to-be foreclosed mansion and drove straight to the club. Vivian marched through the heavy glass doors of the grand lobby, wearing her oversized designer sunglasses and her best silk summer dress, projecting an aura of completely fabricated confidence. Chloe trailed behind her, looking pale and sick, clutching her bare left hand where her $50,000 engagement ring used to be. Vivian walked confidently up to the marble reception desk and slammed her platinum membership card down on the counter. "I need my usual table on the terrace," she demanded, pitching her voice loud enough for the wealthy patrons lingering in the lobby to hear. "And bring a bottle of your best champagne. We are celebrating a minor misunderstanding that my husband is currently resolving with his lawyers." The club manager, a stern man who had catered to Vivian's ridiculous demands for over a decade, did not reach for the card. He simply looked at it and then looked back up at her with an expression of absolute icy disdain. "I am afraid that will not be possible, Mrs. Caldwell," the manager stated, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet lobby. "Your account is frozen. In fact, your primary bank rejected our monthly membership draft this morning." Vivian's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Do not be ridiculous," she hissed, leaning over the counter. "Run it again. The system must be making an error. Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," the manager replied, raising his voice so every patron in the lobby could hear him perfectly. "You are the wife of an embezzler who just lost his entire congregation. Your membership has been permanently revoked by the board of directors effective immediately. I must ask you and your daughter to leave the premises before I call security to escort you out for trespassing." The whispers started instantly. Wealthy women sitting in the lounge turned their heads, pointing their perfectly manicured fingers at Vivian and Chloe. The sneers, the quiet laughter, the absolute humiliation was suffocating. Vivian snatched her useless card off the marble counter, her hands shaking violently. Chloe was staring at the faces of the people who used to worship them. She saw the absolute disgust in their eyes. The wealthy friends she had bragged to about her billionaire fiancé were now looking at her like she was a beggar who had wandered in from the street. The reality of her absolute ruin finally shattered Chloe's delicate mind. Brad was gone. The ring was gone. The money was gone. The penthouses, the sports cars, the elite status, it had all vaporized. She had nothing left but the mother who had enabled this entire disaster. Chloe spun around in the middle of the grand lobby, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. Vivian reached out, trying to grab her daughter's arm. "Chloe, sweetie, let us go. We will call the lawyers." Chloe violently slapped her mother's hand away, slapping it so hard the sound echoed off the high ceilings. "Do not touch me," Chloe screamed, her voice shattering the quiet elegance of the country club. "This is your fault. You let Dad steal that money. You let Brad into our house. You promised me I was going to be richer than everyone else. You told me Maya was a loser." Exactly 48 hours after that spectacular public meltdown, the ultimate reality check arrived at the sprawling Caldwell estate in Buckhead. The heavy thud of combat boots echoing across the imported marble floors of the grand foyer signaled the absolute end of their reign. The Fulton County Sheriff's Department did not care about the custom crystal chandeliers or the curated art collection. They were simply executing a federal seizure order backed by Horizon Investment Fund. 6 armed deputies were already methodically carrying out the custom Italian leather sofas and the antique dining chairs, loading them into a massive moving truck parked on the pristine front lawn. Vivian and Chloe stood near the sweeping staircase, weeping hysterically and clutching their matching silk designer bathrobes. Their faces were puffy and devoid of the expensive makeup that usually served as their daily armor. "You cannot do this!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking as a deputy walked past her carrying a priceless Ming vase. "Put that down immediately. This is private property. Do you have any idea who I am?" The lead sheriff, a tall man with a completely unimpressed expression, stopped at the base of the stairs and handed her a thick stack of legal documents. "Yes, ma'am," the sheriff replied bluntly. "You are a squatter. The bank seized this property yesterday morning to cover the $8 million federal fraud deficit. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises with whatever personal clothing you can fit into your vehicles. Everything else stays." Before Vivian could launch into another hysterical tirade, the sound of crunching gravel drew everyone's attention to the open front doors. A sleek, armored black Maybach glided smoothly up the circular driveway, coming to a silent halt right behind the sheriff's transport vehicles. The rear door opened and I stepped out. I was wearing a tailored white Tom Ford suit that stood in stark contrast to the absolute misery unfolding on the lawn. Julian stepped out from the opposite side, directing a team of corporate property appraisers toward the front entrance. I was not there to gloat. I was simply there to oversee the preliminary property appraisal for my holding company. Maya Chloe gasped, her eyes widening as I walked gracefully up the front steps. The sight of me looking like a conquering queen completely broke whatever fragile pride my sister still possessed. She did not yell. She did not hurl insults. She completely shattered. Chloe sprinted out the front doors, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone of the porch. She threw herself down onto the rough cobblestone driveway, falling hard onto her knees, right in front of my expensive heels. Maya. Please, Chloe begged, openly sobbing as the rough stones scraped her bare skin. I have nowhere to go. All my credit cards are declined. Brad took my ring. My friends will not even answer my texts. Please, Maya. You own the bank. You own all of this now. Just let us stay in the guest house. We will stay out of your way. I am begging you. I looked down at the weeping girl who had spent her entire life making sure I knew I was worthless. I looked at the sister who used to lock me in closets and laugh at my scars. No, I said, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. I stepped around her, leaving her sobbing on the cobblestones, and walked into my new house. Later that evening, the sky over Atlanta finally broke, unleashing a torrential downpour that matched the bleakness of the Caldwells' ruined lives. The heavy rain washed the streets clean as I left the executive elevators and walked into the secure VIP parking garage beneath the Horizon Fund headquarters. The garage was dimly lit and echoing with the sound of water rushing through the storm drains. I pressed the button on my key fob, hearing the Maybach chirp in the distance. As I walked toward my car, a shadowed figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar blocking my path. It was Vivian. She looked entirely destroyed. Her hair was plastered to her face by the rain. Her expensive silk dress was soaked through and ruined, and her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She looked haggard, desperate, and completely stripped of her aristocratic vanity. She had managed to bypass the outer security gate by slipping in behind a delivery truck waiting in the damp shadows just to corner me. Maya. Vivian gasped, stepping forward with her hands raised in a pleading gesture. You have to listen to me. You have to stop this. I stopped walking, maintaining a safe distance. My expression remained perfectly cold. You took the church, Vivian cried, her voice echoing shrilly in the empty concrete garage. You took the house. Marcus is sitting in a federal holding cell, and his lawyers will not even return my calls because our accounts are frozen. You have destroyed everything. But you cannot leave me with nothing, Maya. You cannot put your own mother on the street. She took another step forward, attempting to invoke the ultimate biological guilt trip. She placed a hand over her heart, trying to look like a wounded martyr. I carried you for 9 months, Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured anguish. I gave you life. You owe me your life, Maya. I am your mother. You have to give me something to survive. I did not argue with her. I did not yell. I did not waste my breath pointing out the decades of abuse, the neglect, or the absolute hypocrisy of her sudden maternal desperation. I simply looked at her shivering in the damp parking garage and nodded slowly. You are absolutely right, Vivian, I said, my voice deadly calm. I do owe you something for everything you have given me over the years. Vivian's tear-stained face instantly brightened with a flash of greedy hope. She actually thought her manipulation had worked. She thought she had successfully played the mother card and was about to receive a massive cashier's check, a deed to a luxury condo, or a monthly allowance to keep her quiet. She wiped her eyes, sniffing pathetically as she watched my hands. I reached into my designer leather bag and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I held it out toward her. Vivian snatched the envelope from my hand with terrifying speed, tearing the paper open with her shaking, wet fingers. She reached inside and pulled out the single slip of paper. Her eager expression immediately froze, twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. It was not a deed. It was not a Horizon Investment Fund corporate check. It was the exact same wrinkled, crumpled $5,000 check that Chloe had thrown at me in the restaurant bathroom just weeks ago. The hush money they had tried to use to make me disappear. Vivian stared at the check, her hands trembling violently, as the absolute finality of her situation crashed down on her. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing without any sound. I leaned in slightly, the ambient light reflecting off the scar on my forehead. "Take this," I whispered, my words cutting through the damp air like a physical blade. "Use it for a cheap motel. And never speak to me again." 6 months later, the damp chill of that parking garage was replaced by the suffocating tension of the Fulton County Courthouse. The trial of the decade had consumed the entire city. Every wooden pew in the massive courtroom was packed shoulder to shoulder with disgraced church board members, investigative journalists, and former parishioners who wanted to see the monster unmasked. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. I sat perfectly straight in the witness stand, resting my hands calmly in my lap. I wore a tailored black blazer that projected absolute authority. Across the room, Marcus sat slumped at the defense table. He had aged 10 years in the span of 6 months. His hair had thinned and turned stark white, and his custom designer suits had been replaced by a baggy, ill-fitting county uniform. He refused to look at me. Julian sat in the front row of the gallery, radiating quiet, predatory pride. He never took his eyes off me. Sitting directly beside Julian was a woman who commanded just as much respect as the judge presiding over the trial. Julian's mother, a highly respected sitting federal court judge, had flown in from Washington simply to watch the execution. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded, her gaze sharp and terrifyingly analytical. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached the stand. She asked me to recount the events leading up to the corporate seizure. I leaned into the microphone. I did not shed a single tear. I did not allow my voice to waver. I delivered a chillingly unemotional and legally flawless recounting of my father's crimes. I started with the financial fraud. I detailed exactly how Marcus bypassed the church oversight committee. I provided dates, account numbers, and transfer routing codes. I explained with clinical precision how he illegally siphoned $8 million of untaxed charitable donations into an offshore holding account to secure a predatory commercial loan. Then the prosecutor asked about the night in the garage. I turned my head slightly, making sure the 12 members of the jury had a clear view of the jagged silver scar cutting across my forehead. My father confronted me when he realized his fraudulent transfer had been flagged, I told the silent courtroom. He did not ask for my help. He demanded my total submission. When I refused, he picked up a landscaping brick and smashed it directly into my face. I fell to the concrete. He stood over me while blood poured into my eyes and soaked my clothes. He laughed and told me I was worthless. The prosecutor let the horrific image hang in the air for a long moment before asking her final question. "Why did you not report the abuse earlier, Miss Caldwell?" I looked directly at Marcus, forcing him to finally lift his head and meet my eyes. "My father preached a strict doctrine of family first," I said, my voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "He sold that concept to millions of viewers every Sunday. But in the Caldwell household, the family first motto was not a mandate for love or protection. It was a weapon. It was a convenient cover for exploitation. It meant you kept your mouth shut while he leveraged the congregation to fund his billionaire lifestyle. It meant you covered your bleeding bruises with heavy makeup before Sunday service so the investors would keep writing checks. He used the illusion of family to hold us all hostage." A heavy, shocked silence blanketed the courtroom as the prosecutor thanked me and took her seat. Marcus' defense attorney, a sweaty, aggressive man known for his theatrical courtroom antics, jumped up for the cross-examination. He paced in front of the jury box, pointing an accusing finger in my direction. "You are playing the victim." Miss Caldwell, the defense lawyer sneered, raising his voice to a theatrical boom, but you are not a victim. You are a ruthless corporate raider. You orchestrated this entire financial collapse because you are a vengeful, greedy daughter who wanted to steal your father's megachurch and seize his fortune for your own holding company. You set a trap and you are just angry that he fought back. I remained perfectly still. I opened my mouth to calmly dismantle his ridiculous accusation, but I did not have to say a single word. The defense lawyer opened his mouth to launch another aggressive insult, but his voice suddenly caught in his throat. His eyes had darted past me and landed on the front row of the gallery. Julian's mother had leaned slightly forward in her heavy oak seat. She locked eyes directly with the defense attorney. She did not say a word. She did not make a sound. She simply stared him down with a look of such absolute terrifying judicial disdain that the lawyer physically recoiled. As a prominent federal judge, her reputation was legendary, and her influence in the legal community was absolute. Her silent glare carried a deafening unspoken threat. If he continued this disrespectful line of questioning against her future daughter-in-law, he would never practice law in her district or any other district ever again. The aggressive attorney swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He broke eye contact immediately, his face flushing bright red. He looked down at his legal pad, shuffled his papers nervously, and cleared his throat. "I withdraw the question," the lawyer mumbled, stepping backward. "I have no further questions, Your Honor." He practically ran back to the defense table, leaving Marcus staring at him in utter disbelief. The judge dismissed me from the stand. I stepped down and walked calmly out of the courtroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. The trial concluded shortly after. The judge instructed the jury and sent them back to deliberate. Legal experts had predicted a lengthy deliberation given the complex financial documents involved. But the absolute clarity of the evidence, combined with the horrifying reality of the physical assault, made it a very simple decision. Less than 2 hours later, the sharp, loud buzzer echoed through the courthouse. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom rapidly refilled. The tension was electric. Marcus stood at the defense table, his entire body trembling violently. The foreman of the jury stood holding the printed sheet of paper. On the charge of aggravated assault, the foreman read, his voice ringing out clearly. "We find the defendant guilty. On the charge of federal wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of corporate embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty." They read through all 14 counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Marcus let out a strangled, pathetic cry and collapsed into his chair. The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel and brought it down with a thunderous crack that signaled the absolute end of the Caldwell empire. "Bailiffs, take the defendant into custody," the judge ordered. 2 massive court officers moved in immediately, grabbing Marcus by the shoulders and hauling him to his feet. They yanked his arms roughly behind his back. The heavy metallic clink of the thick iron chains locking around his wrists echoed perfectly through the silent gallery. Marcus was sobbing uncontrollably, dragging his feet as the bailiffs physically hauled him away to begin his sentence. 6 months later, the suffocating heat of the Georgia summer baked the cracked pavement of the Southside housing projects. The sprawling Caldwell mansion in Buckhead was a distant, faded memory, replaced entirely by the grim reality of Building 4 in a neglected Section 8 complex. The air inside the cramped one-bedroom unit was thick and stagnant, smelling heavily of bleached stale cigarette smoke and decades of rotting mildew. The walls were paper-thin, allowing the sounds of shouting neighbors and wailing sirens to bleed through constantly. Chloe dragged a heavy black plastic garbage bag up 3 flights of stained concrete stairs. Her arms shook from the physical exertion. The bag scraped against the rusted metal railing, tearing a jagged hole that spilled a tangle of cheap, faded clothing onto the filthy landing. Chloe did not bother picking the garments up. She kicked the hollow door of apartment 3B open and hauled the torn bag inside, letting it drop onto the peeling yellow linoleum floor with a heavy, dull thud. She was wearing a hideous, bright yellow polyester uniform that reeked permanently of old fryer grease and cheap industrial cleaner. A plastic name tag pinned crookedly to her chest read, "Trainee." Her once perfectly manicured hands were red, blistered, and raw from scrubbing industrial grills for minimum wage. Her designer highlights had grown out, leaving harsh, dark roots that framed her exhausted, hollowed-out face. Chloe wiped a streak of greasy sweat from her forehead and glared furiously at the center of the cramped, stifling room. Vivian sat perfectly rigid on a rusted metal folding chair. She was wearing a stained silk blouse from her former life, staring blankly at the water-damaged wallpaper. Her eyes were completely empty, devoid of the sharp aristocratic arrogance that had defined her entire existence. Her mind had simply snapped. The absolute loss of her wealth, her husband, and her social supremacy had shattered her grip on reality. Chloe kicked the garbage bag again, sending a cheap shoe skittering across the floor. "Are you even listening to me, Mother? I said they found me." Chloe's voice cracked, breaking into a ragged, hysterical sob. "The girls from the country club, Jessica and Lauren. They drove through my lane at the burger window today. They pulled up in Jessica's brand new Range Rover, and they saw me handing them a greasy paper bag." Chloe paced the tiny room, her chest heaving with humiliation and rage. "They ordered a single small fry just so I would have to stand at the window and serve them. They laughed right in my face, Mother. They pulled out their phones and took pictures of me in this disgusting uniform. They posted it everywhere online. My phone has not stopped buzzing with people mocking me. Everyone knows we are absolute trash now. We are the laughingstock of the entire city." Vivian did not blink. She slowly raised a cracked plastic cup to her lips, holding it exactly like a crystal champagne flute. "We must remind the staff to polish the foyer chandelier before the gala." Vivian whispered, her voice eerily calm and entirely detached from reality. "The governor is attending, and I will not tolerate dust on the crystal. Make sure the caterers use the good silver tonight." Chloe let out a scream of pure frustration, pulling violently at her unwashed hair. "There is no gala, there is no staff. We are living in a slum. We have absolutely nothing left. The $5,000 check Maya gave you ran out 3 months ago, paying for cheap motels and lawyers who did absolutely nothing for Dad. He is rotting in a federal cell, and we are rotting in this garbage dump." A heavy, aggressive pounding on the door cut Chloe's rant short. The cheap wood rattled violently on its loose hinges. Chloe froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. They were already barely scraping by, and any knock at the door usually meant trouble. She wiped her greasy face, took a deep breath, and slowly pulled the door open. A massive, burly man in a sweat-stained undershirt stood in the dimly lit hallway. He was the property manager for the complex, a ruthless enforcer named Mac, who smelled strongly of stale cigars and cheap cologne. He held a thick clipboard pressed against his massive chest and glared down at Chloe with absolute unconcealed disdain. "What do you want?" Chloe asked, shrinking back slightly into the apartment. "We paid the security deposit. We just moved the last of our bags inside. We do not have any more money to give you." Mac did not smile. He shoved a thick stack of stapled legal documents directly into Chloe's chest, forcing her to take them or drop them on the floor. "Management changed hands this morning," he grunted, his rough voice echoing in the cramped hallway. "The whole concrete block got bought out by a private equity firm in a massive cash deal. They are clearing house and upgrading all the lease agreements. Read it and sign it today, or you are out on the street by midnight." Chloe looked down at the documents. Her hands began to shake violently. Printed in bold black ink across the very top of the lease agreement was a sleek corporate logo she recognized instantly. It was the same logo that had been plastered across the foreclosure notices at their Buckhead mansion. Horizon Investment Fund. "No." Chloe breathed, the blood rushing completely out of her face. "No, this is impossible. She cannot own this building too. She cannot be everywhere." Vivian remained entirely oblivious, still staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper and sipping from her empty plastic cup. "Tell the chef the caviar is slightly warm," Vivian muttered to the empty room. Chloe stared at the Horizon Investment Fund logo, realizing the horrifying truth. Maya owned the roof over their heads. Maya held their literal survival in the palm of her hand. There was no escaping her. The corporate net was entirely closed around them, and there was nowhere left to run. Mac leaned heavily into the doorway, invading their tiny, pathetic space. His eyes locked onto Chloe, delivering the final crushing blow with mechanical precision. The owner says rent is due on the 1st. No extensions, no family discounts. The heavy wooden door of the Section 8 apartment slammed shut with a definitive click, leaving Vivian and Chloe alone in the stifling, mildewed silence of their new reality. That definitive click echoed across the city, transitioning seamlessly into the soft melodic chime of a crystal champagne flute being set down on a marble vanity. I stood in the center of the master suite, inside a lavish penthouse high above the Atlanta skyline. The morning sun poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the entire room in warm, golden light. The panoramic view of the bustling city was absolutely breathtaking, but my attention was focused entirely on the massive gilded mirror standing directly in front of me. I was wearing a custom-tailored silk wedding gown. It was structurally flawless, possessing sharp, elegant lines that commanded attention without begging for it. I did not look like the scared, bleeding girl who had been left for dead on a cold concrete garage floor. I looked like a woman who had systematically dismantled a corrupt empire and built a much stronger one from its absolute ashes. The heavy oak doors of the master suite opened quietly behind me. Julian stepped into the room looking devastatingly handsome in a sharp, bespoke black tuxedo. He did not say a word as he crossed the plush carpet. He simply stepped up directly behind me and wrapped his strong arms securely around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. I leaned into his embrace, meeting his dark, intense gaze in the reflection of the mirror. Julian turned his head slightly and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my cheek, landing right next to the faint, jagged silver scar my father had given me with that landscaping brick. I used to hide that scar under heavy makeup, but today I wore it proudly without an ounce of concealer. It was not a mark of shame anymore. It was my crown. "Are you ready, Mrs. Horizon?" Julian asked, his deep voice vibrating against my shoulder. I reached up and rested my manicured hand over his, feeling the cool metal of his wedding band. "I have been ready my whole life," I replied. Julian smiled, a genuine warm expression that was reserved exclusively for me. He stepped back and offered me his arm. We walked together out of the master suite and down the wide glass hallway toward the grand terrace where the ceremony was taking place. The contrast between this glorious day and the suffocating nightmare of my past was staggering. When I was a child, I always assumed my wedding would be a massive theatrical production dictated entirely by Vivian and funded by Marcus to impress their wealthy country club friends. I had pictured a room full of toxic, judgmental relatives whispering behind their hands and coldly evaluating the floral arrangements. But there was absolutely zero toxic blood present today. Marcus was currently sitting in a maximum security federal prison wearing a bright orange jumpsuit and eating processed cafeteria food. Vivian and Chloe were trapped in a sweltering Section 8 apartment, scrubbing grease off their hands and worrying about making their rent payment to my corporate holding company. They were entirely erased from my existence. Instead, the sprawling rooftop terrace was filled with my chosen family. As I approached the glass double doors leading out to the ceremony, I could see them all waiting for me. Julian's mother, the formidable federal judge, sat in the front row, radiating maternal warmth and absolute pride. Beside her sat the brilliant financial auditors who had meticulously helped me trace Marcus' offshore accounts. My fiercely loyal executive assistants, the brilliant corporate lawyers who had orchestrated the hostile takeover, and the close friends who had stood by me when I had absolutely nothing were all seated in the elegant white chairs. This was my real family. They were not bound to me by genetics or forced biological obligation. They were bound by mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and shared triumphs. They had earned their seats at my table, and I trusted every single person in that crowd with my life. The string quartet positioned near the altar began to play a soft, elegant melody, signaling that it was almost time for my grand entrance. Julian squeezed my hand, gave me one last reassuring smile, and walked out onto the terrace to take his place at the altar. I stood alone in the quiet antechamber, taking a deep, steadying breath. I was just about to signal the wedding coordinator to open the doors when my lead corporate attorney, The man who had helped me execute the final foreclosure stepped into the hallway, holding a sleek black leather portfolio. Maya, the attorney said, keeping his voice low and thoroughly respectful. I am so sorry to interrupt you right before you walk down the aisle, but the final city zoning permits just cleared the mayor's office 5 minutes ago. If we want the contractors to begin the demolition phase by tomorrow morning, I need your official signature right now. I did not complain or hesitate. I reached out and took the heavy gold pen he offered. He opened the portfolio, revealing the final legal deed and the municipal architectural blueprints for the sprawling Buckhead mansion I had seized from my family. The massive, imposing property that had once served as a physical monument to Marcus Greed and Vivian's suffocating vanity was about to be completely gutted and structurally repurposed. I looked down at the detailed blueprints tracing the massive architectural changes. The grand ballroom where Vivian used to host her pretentious elite galas was being converted into a communal dining hall. The luxurious, oversized guest suites were being subdivided into safe, secure housing units. The massive private library where Marcus used to sit and count his embezzled congregation funds was being transformed into an active legal clinic and a professional job training center. I was officially converting the Caldwell estate into a fully funded private sanctuary for survivors of domestic and financial abuse. I was taking the very house where I had been systematically tormented and turning it into an impenetrable fortress to protect women who had nowhere else to run. It was the ultimate poetic justice. I pressed the gold pen to the thick paper and signed my name with absolute undeniable finality. I handed the portfolio back to the attorney and offered him a sharp, brilliant smile. The heavy glass doors leading to the sunlit terrace slowly swung open, revealing my beautiful future waiting for me at the altar. I stepped forward, leaving the past entirely behind me. The warm, salty breeze of the Atlantic Ocean caught the edge of my silk veil as I glided down the pristine white aisle. Julian had moved heaven and earth to secure this private coastal estate for our ceremony, knowing the ocean brought me a sense of absolute peace. The rhythmic crash of the waves against the rocky shoreline provided a powerful natural symphony that perfectly matched the swelling music of the string quartet. Every face I passed radiated genuine love and fierce loyalty. There were no fake country club smiles, no whispered judgments, and absolutely no Caldwells. I walked toward Julian feeling lighter than air, my heart expanding with every single step. 300 miles away in the suffocating squalor of Building 4, the only sound was the pathetic crunch of stale generic brand cereal. Chloe sat slumped at a rusted card table, wearing her grease-stained fast food uniform. The cramped kitchen smelled distinctly of sour milk and rotting garbage. Across the sticky table, Vivian stared blankly at the chipped formica surface, pulling a ratty gray blanket tightly around her shoulders, despite the sweltering Georgia heat. The air conditioner had broken 2 weeks ago, and the property manager refused to fix it. Chloe scooped another spoonful of soggy cereal into her mouth, tasting absolutely nothing but her own bitter despair. Julian took my hands as I reached the altar. His dark eyes were shining with an intensity that took my breath away. He did not look at the jagged scar on my forehead. He looked directly into my soul. The ocean breeze fluttered his dark hair as the officiant began the ceremony. When it was time for the vows, Julian did not read from a piece of paper. He held my hands tightly against his chest and spoke loud enough for our entire chosen family to hear. "You survived a nightmare designed to destroy you, Maya," he said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "They tried to break you because they were terrified of what you could build. Today, you are unbreakable. You took the ashes of their corruption and forged an empire of light. I promise to stand by your side to protect your peace and to build this beautiful new world with you for the rest of our lives." Chloe aggressively slapped the side of a small ancient television set resting on a milk crate. The screen flickered violently before stabilizing into a fuzzy, static-filled image. She just wanted background noise to drown out the sound of her mother's shallow, erratic breathing. The local Atlanta news broadcast crackled through the cheap, blown-out speakers. The anchor woman appeared on screen, wearing a sharp red blazer, looking dead into the camera with breaking news. Chloe chewed her cereal mechanically, completely uninvested, until she heard her own last name echoing through the dismal apartment. I slipped the heavy platinum band onto Julian's finger, feeling a profound sense of absolute victory. I spoke my vows, promising to honor our partnership and cherish the beautiful life we had fought so desperately to secure. When the officiant finally pronounced us husband and wife, the entire coastal estate erupted in deafening applause. Julian pulled me in for a deep, passionate kiss, and the crowd of loyal friends and allies cheered even louder. We turned to face our guests, raising our joined hands in triumph. The nightmare was officially over. The future was entirely ours. The news anchor on the fuzzy television screen smiled brightly. In a stunning display of corporate philanthropy, the former Caldwell estate has officially been repurposed, the anchor announced. Chloe froze, her plastic spoon hovering inches from her mouth. The screen cut to high-definition footage of their old, sprawling Buckhead mansion. But the grand, imposing gates were gone. The ostentatious gold trim had been stripped away. In its place stood a sleek, modern sanctuary surrounded by beautiful, lush gardens. A massive, polished stone sign near the entrance read, "Horizon Safe Haven for Abused Women." Chloe stopped breathing. The broadcast cut to footage recorded just a few hours prior. It showed Maya standing directly in front of the transformed mansion. She was glowing in her breathtaking custom silk wedding dress, looking like an absolute goddess. Julian stood proudly by her side. Maya held a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors and snipped a thick blue ribbon draped across the front doors of the sanctuary. The crowd on the television cheered wildly, praising her incredible generosity and vision. The anchorwoman reappeared, her voice filled with admiration. Maya Horizon, formerly Maya Caldwell, has successfully erased the dark, corrupt history of her father's financial empire, replacing it with a beacon of hope for the entire city. The plastic spoon slipped from Chloe's trembling fingers. It hit the rusted metal table with a sharp, pathetic clatter, splashing drops of sour milk onto her greasy uniform. She stared at the television screen, completely paralyzed by the magnitude of her sister's absolute victory. Maya had not just taken their money. Maya had not just taken their home. Maya had taken their very identity and transformed it into a monument of her own triumph. Across the sticky table, Vivian let out a strangled, pathetic sound. A single tear tracked through the thick layer of dirt on her cheek. Vivian was finally lucid enough to comprehend the broadcast. She saw her glorious, beloved mansion, the ultimate symbol of her social supremacy, stripped away and gifted to the very women she used to mock and despise. Vivian began to cry silently, her shoulders shaking violently under the ratty gray blanket. Chloe could not move. She could not speak. She simply stared at the beautiful, radiant image of her sister on the television screen. In that suffocating, sweltering Section 8 apartment, the terrifying reality finally crushed them both. They did not just lose their money, they were permanently erased from the legacy of the city. The oppressive, stifling heat of the Atlanta slums was a million miles away, replaced by the crisp, salty breeze of the Atlantic Ocean. The sleek 90-foot private yacht cut effortlessly through the deep sapphire water, leaving a trail of churning white foam in its wake. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the expansive horizon in brilliant streaks of crushed violet, burnt orange, and spun gold. There were no concrete walls here, no blaring sirens, and absolutely no ghosts of the past. There was only the limitless ocean and the absolute certainty of freedom. I stood on the polished teak deck of the bow, leaning against the smooth metal railing. The sea breeze caught the edges of my light evening dress, whipping the fabric around my legs. The faint, jagged scar on my forehead was fully exposed to the fading sunlight, a permanent badge of survival. I did not feel the phantom sting of the brick anymore. I only felt the steady, rhythmic rocking of the waves beneath my feet. Julian stepped out from the main cabin holding 2 crystal flutes of vintage champagne. He had shed his tuxedo jacket hours ago, his white dress shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing his strong forearms. He walked toward me with that familiar predatory grace, but his eyes held nothing but profound warmth. He handed me one of the flutes and stepped close, wrapping his free arm securely around my waist. He pulled me back against his chest, resting his chin gently on the top of my head. We stood in perfect, comfortable silence, watching the sun dip closer to the water. My mind drifted back over the chaotic, turbulent events of the past 2 years. The journey from lying bleeding on a damp garage floor to standing on the deck of a private yacht had been brutal, exhausting, and utterly transformative. I took a slow sip of the cold, crisp champagne and let the reality of my victory wash over me. It had all been so remarkably clean in the end. The law had handled the crimes. The federal prosecutors and the meticulously gathered financial evidence had locked Marcus in a concrete cage where his booming, charismatic sermons meant absolutely nothing. Financial strategy had handled the arrogance. The forensic accountants and the aggressive corporate acquisitions had systematically dismantled Vivian's manufactured aristocratic superiority, leaving her with nothing but the empty shell of her own delusions. Total silence and impenetrable boundaries had handled the toxicity. The strict zero-contact policy and the sheer undeniable scale of my success had completely neutralized Chloe's vicious jealousy. I did not have to yell, scream, or stoop to their level of depravity. I simply outworked them, outsmarted them, and outlived their cruelty. Julian clinked his glass against mine, breaking my internal reflection. "To the future, Mrs. Horizon," he murmured, his voice vibrating against my shoulder. "A future built on our own terms." "To the future," I echoed, taking another sip of the champagne. A sharp, sudden vibration interrupted the quiet moment. My sleek silver smartphone rested on a small glass side table a few feet away. The screen illuminated brightly in the dimming evening light, demanding attention. I stepped out of Julian's embrace and walked over to the table, picking up the device. It was an automated administrative notification from the Horizon Investment Fund property management software. The bold black text glowing on the screen was incredibly brief, but carried a staggering amount of weight. Rent payment processed. Tenant Chloe Caldwell. Unit 3B. Current account balance $12. I stared at the screen for a long, silent moment. $12. That was the sum total of my sister's existence. That was all that remained of the spoiled, entitled girl who had mocked my work ethic and gleefully participated in my destruction. She had just handed over her last desperate dollars to the very corporate entity I had built from the ground up just to secure another 30 days in a moldy apartment I owned. There was no surge of vindictive glee. There was no overwhelming wave of malicious joy. There was only a profound clinical sense of closure. The ledger was officially balanced. The debt was entirely paid. The Caldwell family was completely bankrupt in every conceivable sense of the word. Julian walked up beside me, glancing down at the brightly lit screen. He read the notification, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. He looked up at me, raising one dark eyebrow in a silent question. I looked back at the phone. I did not archive the message. I did not save it for later gloating. I simply swiped the notification away, clearing the screen entirely. I gripped the smooth metal edge of the phone, feeling its cool weight in my palm. I looked out at the vast, churning ocean. Then, with a smooth, effortless motion, I threw the phone over the railing. The silver device flipped end over end, catching the last rays of the dying sun before hitting the dark water with a faint, insignificant splash. It sank instantly, swallowed by the depths, taking every last digital tether to my old life down to the bottom of the ocean. I did not need the contacts, the emails, or the satisfying property management alerts anymore. I was completely unburdened. Julian let out a low, appreciative laugh. He set his champagne flute down on the glass table and reached for me, pulling me back into his arms. I smiled, a genuine, unhindered smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I wrapped my arms around his neck, leaning my full weight into his solid, comforting presence. The camera slowly pans out, moving backward over the bow of the yacht. The sleek white vessel becomes smaller and smaller against the massive, overwhelming canvas of the deep blue sea. The sky burns in magnificent, vibrant shades of crimson and violet as the sun finally touches the horizon. They used a brick to smash my face, hoping to prove I was nothing. My voice echoes clearly over the sound of the rushing waves, carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged forged in steel. I took that exact same brick washed off the blood and used it as the cornerstone for my empire. Sweet revenge is not about destroying them. It is about letting them watch you conquer the world they desperately wanted. The ultimate lesson from Maya's journey is that true vindication doesn't require stooping to your abuser's level. It comes from outgrowing them completely. Maya took the darkest parts of her past, the literal brick meant to break her, and transformed it into a foundation for monumental success and healing. While toxic people inevitably destroy themselves through their own greed and arrogance, survivors reclaim their power by building a life of authentic purpose and impenetrable boundaries. Have you ever turned a painful betrayal into your greatest victory? Share your story below and please subscribe for more empowering journeys.